those internal factors. What are they? So these are the developmental things going on in the person's body, the child's body, as they make that transition from childhood into adolescence. And we can think about 3 categories of internal or developmental changes. So the first will be physical. Okay, you might hear about that being called puberty. So the body goes through a stage of puberty and develops to be an adult body. Developmental changes. So it's not that long ago that we actually thought that the first 5 years of a child's life were the most important, and all their development, that sensitive period, was set before the age of 5. Okay, we now know that actually there are neurodevelopmental changes in adolescence, and some people argue that perhaps adolescence is a sensitive period for further development. So we know that there are some changes to brain structure in adolescence, and again, that will be influenced by hormones and hormones. And we also talk about a third category called functional changes. So adolescents should become much more well-developed thinkers, have more advanced cognitive skills, have more advanced language skills. Okay? So there are functional changes too. So 3 categories to those internal or developmental changes: physical, neurodevelopmental, and functional. So a quick word about physical changes. Okay. The predetermined hormones that kick in towards the end of childhood and can really mark that transition to adulthood. And we'll come back to think about that and the implications of that for the future. Let us think about neurodevelopmental. Okay, well, this is quite a new area of work, and lots of studies done at how the adolescent brain develops in adolescence. Quite neurodevelopmental, very scientific, so it's about brain scanning, it's about dissecting or post-mortem studies of adolescent brain to see whether there are changes in the adolescent brain compared to childhood. What people have found is that what they call an increased activation of the prefrontal cortex. So those bits right at the front of the brain, they argue that in adolescence there's more activation of those, there's more myelination of them, that it works quicker and faster. And it's argued that due to that increased activation of those frontal areas of the brain, the adolescents are able to develop those higher level cognitive skills. So things like social cognition, theory of mind, executive function, response inhibition. Okay. So something about those skills coming into play as adolescents, and that's in line with these very observable neurodevelopmental changes. It's thought that that activation of that prefrontal cortex area results in better impulsivity control. Okay, so adolescents are able to control their own behaviours more than they could do in childhood. It's thought that due to issues around the maturation of the limbic system, so that structure right in the middle of the brain, again, that's linked to being better able to have more social awareness, perspective of others, being able to empathise with other people much more than they could in childhood. So it's argued that teenagers are developing these skills still in adolescence, and it's argued that the risky behaviours that some adolescents show are due to this still developing. So it hasn't quite come on board yet. The risky behaviours are due to these areas not being fully developed, and as they move through adolescence and into maturity, this will all come online. So it's really important that we remember there are these observable neurodevelopmental changes. I think not long ago in the media there were some studies reported about there being reasons why adolescents slept more in the mornings. Okay, so that shift in sleeping patterns, that arguing parents saying that their teenage children were on bed, and it's argued that's due to neurodevelopmental changes, that change in sleep pattern. So it's about understanding adolescent behaviour and perhaps linking it back to some of these neurodevelopmental changes. Functional changes, so at the same time all that's going on. Some issues around language development, so it talks about changes in cognition, talks about changes in language development, so we know that adolescents have quite a big shift in their syntax development, their thought, the complexity of the language that they understand and use. We know that they're great at manipulating languages. They can use lots of different words with multiple meanings. They can understand very complex amounts of information. If there's anyone recently been into a secondary school, sat in a science lesson, you're dealing with all sorts of scientific terminology, things like photosynthesis, metamorphosis, etc. And most teenagers are able to manage that very abstract language and understand its meaning. Teenagers will learn language in a very different way to how children do. Okay, let's think about that. So how do teenagers learn new language compared to your young children? What's different for them?
They use like the information about what they already know about words and put things together.
So they're using the context of their prior learning, right? So you call that contextual abstraction. Yeah.
They learn a lot of language through reading.
Absolutely. The big shift is from the verbal learning to the written learning. Okay. And adolescents are expected to, and they do, learn new language through reading. So that's the medium by which teenagers in this country are expected to learn new language. If you're not a very good reader, what happens? Well, you're at a disadvantage. Your peers are good readers. You're going to be at a disadvantage. So there's a cycle going on. The better reader you are, the more language you can access, the more new language you can learn, the more reading you can do. Okay, so it's like a vicious circle in there. If you're not a good reader, less reading, and then less language, or have less language to learn, new language in order to read. That's a circle going on there. We know that adolescent narrative becomes more coherent and complex, and we know that their pragmatic skills do. So in line with those issues around social cognition, they have that ability to have different friendship groups, different peer relationships, to understand the intricacies of those and to manage those as well. The important point is that shift from verbal, spoken language to written language, and that's the medium through which adolescents are expected to learn in written language. That's a big functional change for our adolescents. Quick pause. Any questions? Anything that's not been clear? External changes. Okay, so these are the social ones. They're not internal to the young person, but what's going on around them. So we talked about expectations earlier, and there is a big shift in society's expectations of our teenagers. So some people talk about responsibility being shifted towards the young person, having more independence that we talked about earlier, things like transition to being financially independent, earning your own money, having independent living skills in order to make that transition through adolescence and to be a mature, independent adult. Talked about peer groups a bit already. There's a lot of pressure from the young person's peer group, how that person identifies with their peer groups, how they relate to them. Expectations around sexual relationships. So if we think about the law in this country, it's illegal to have sex under the age of 16, but not once you are 16. There's a big responsibility. Responsibilities over learning to drive. Okay. You can get married at 16, so there are a lot of society's expectations here that do impinge on adolescents. School, college, again we talked about the emphasis on written language, but much more independent styles of learning are needed at secondary schools compared to primary schools. Okay. So big shifts in teaching styles and being able to manage that. For those of you that have come from school into university, often hear first-year students talk about again another shift of learning and teaching style. So more independence at university with less responsibility placed on the adults or the teachers. So lots of external and social changes. So we're thinking about this dynamic in between the two. Okay, so a couple of examples there. So think about that neurodevelopmental change. So that ability to engage in and be more socially cognitive is reflected in your ability to have more complex peer groups. You need that level of social cognition in order to manage and cope with the peer groups that you have. There's functional changes, so increases in language development, reading skills, etc. will again interplay with the teaching style that happens at secondary school. So the greater language literacy skills you have, the more able you're able to cope with that external change of what happens in a secondary school and how you engage in the teaching and learning. And we're going to be thinking about what happens for young people, okay, who perhaps go through adolescence, but not in a typical way, okay, and they have different experiences to our adolescents that are typically developing, and we're going to think about what those challenges are for those young people. So we know that our adolescents with learning difficulties, developmental disorders, continue to be a heterogeneous group. They are simply the children that you may have seen or worked with that have grown up into adolescence. They may be children with syndrome with learning disabilities, they may be children who have quite significant delayed language development, they may be our children with autism spectrum disorders, mild to moderate learning difficulties, etc. All that's happened is that they've grown up. Their problems don't go away, but we have to think about their challenges, their strengths, their weaknesses within that context of adolescence. And that's a very different context to the context of primary school and early years provision. Some of these adolescents may experience many of these same internal and external changes as are typically developing individuals. So let's think about that. Let's think about our 12, 13-year-olds with Down syndrome, okay? Are they going to experience the same external changes, those social changes and expectations as our typically developing young person? Any thoughts? In this country, do you think they would experience the same expectations or would they be different?
They're still moving up in education.
Absolutely, yeah. So the expectations on them are still large. You have to go to a secondary school provision. You're expected to be more independent, etc. So in some way, the expectations are very similar to our typically developing individuals. We know that some specific populations with learning difficulties have additional changes and challenges. So there are types of learning disability, okay, where they don't go through those physical changes of adolescence as typically developing individuals do. It may start much later, that process of puberty, it may not start at all. So again, that's an additional challenge of being a 15-year-old who perhaps doesn't look like a 15-year-old. And again, remember that dynamic interplay, how then the society's expectations impinge on that individual if you are 15 but you don't look like you're 15. So that interplay between those internal and external factors may come together very nicely for most of our typically developing adolescents, but for those with learning difficulties, developmental disorders, it actually poses a series of additional challenges. We might think about that in terms of demand versus a capacity model. So if you're a typically developing adolescent with lots of resources to support you, you have capacities there that enable you to cope with the demands of adolescence. For somebody that has particular challenges and difficulties, there's an argument that your capacities are reduced, and so those demands become much more challenging. Let's have a look at some examples. We were talking puberty, okay, being that time of rapid physical, emotional, and sexual development. Most individuals with developmental disorders will have a typical puberty, just like anybody else will. But there are some exceptions. So you can have Turner syndrome, which we'll look at later, Mhld syndrome, Klinefelter syndrome. They don't go through adolescence. They don't have those changes. They don't go through a period of puberty. That has some significant implications. For other adolescents with learning difficulties that do go through that period of puberty, I think can be quite a confusing, challenging time for them, both for the young people themselves and for people around them. So you may have 15, 16-year-old girls with quite significant learning difficulties that want to engage in relationships. They want to engage in sexual relationships, but actually very vulnerable young people that don't understand how those relationships work and how to enter into them. They can be very vulnerable young people. So I think of an example of a young girl who was 17, okay, very interested in developing relationships with the opposite sex, perfectly normal for a 17-year-old to want to do that. And the way she did it was by showing her through the Meet Me website. Okay, so posted a profile of herself on the Meet Me website and responded to the queries from her profile, met a man at 2 o'clock in the morning and was raped 3 days. That that's an example of how vulnerable a young person can be. So they're having that process of going through puberty, that are really struggling with the challenges, how to keep themselves, and having that cognitive ability to make sure they're protected. So it can be a very challenging time. Thinking again about learning difficulties, developmental disorders, okay, so some adolescents have difficulties understanding that puberty, so things like menstruation will be very difficult for them to understand. May have difficulties understanding or acting on their own sexual thoughts and feelings. And just had an example of that. An example that's often given in the learning difficulty literature is about inappropriate sexual behaviour in public. So that might be a young person lifting their skirt up when they're out in public, etc. It can be any sorts of sexual type of behaviour. And that's obviously construed as being very inappropriate by society, but we have to remember the history, the context of these young people, where that behaviour may be coming from. So, for example, we know that adolescents with significant developmental disorders have much less privacy than other people, so if you're living in supported living, residential accommodation, you actually have very little privacy. So we have to think about how those contextual factors play into the behaviour of some young people. Thinking again about those internal factors, okay, so we talked about specific changes in symptoms, so we know that adolescence is a change in time in terms of their neurodevelopmental structure. We know that some populations do experience specific in their symptomatology, so their profile change, those behaviours that made somebody very autistic spectrum disordered may very well change in adolescence. We know that in things like Fragile X syndrome, for example, that their phenotype, how they look, so their distinctive facial features becomes much more apparent in adolescence. If you're thinking about adolescent issues around self-identity, again that will be a challenge for that young person. It's like Tourette syndrome, the symptoms tend to get less as they go through adolescence, okay, following puberty, and again thought to be linked to some of those neurodevelopmental changes. Children, young people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, again the hyperactivity symptoms particularly tend to get less in adolescence, but their inattention and their impulsivity tends to remain. So they tend to be less on the go, but their impulsivity makes them engage in more risky behaviours as teenagers. Thinking about your general moderate learning difficulties, so where they don't have specific syndrome, for example, that we know a lot of those individuals through adolescence seem to show more difficulties with their pragmatic skills and their social competence skills. And that may be because they just become more pronounced, our expectations of them are greater, so we notice them more. Well, there is an argument that it is due to those changes in social cognition, and they don't experience those neurodevelopmental changes, the increased activation, and so they actually, their social cognition skills don't particularly develop in adolescence. So there's a neurodevelopmental argument, and there's that social expectation. Maybe we're just expecting too much of that individual. It's really important to remember how our perceptions, our own expectations play into this. Think about those external factors, okay, so a lot of young people, blessing nowadays, but there's still a significant majority, are educated in special schools, okay. They may have been in special provision in primary, at secondary, they may then be expected at that point to make transitions to mainstream with support, and that's the enormous challenge for these young people. Dealing with lots of changes, not only in teaching style, infrastructure, how to relate to staff, etc., but they've got a massive peer group to contend with too. So if you think in our primary school, we get to about 150, perhaps 200 children, to one of the big mainstream secondary schools in Sheffield with over 1,200 pupils. That's a big contextual difference to have to try and manage. Lots of different peer groups there, lots of different expectations of the young person. Very, very challenging. Some people argue that that's much better to go into that mainstream secondary school provision than it is to stay in some sort of special needs type provision. Other people argue that if you go into special needs type provision for the rest of your adolescence, that you become to some extent a bit of a victim. Okay, you're not part of mainstream society, that you learn your helplessness, so you become very dependent on that special support system. no rights or wrongs, okay? Because these arguments very much about the individual, what the individual wants. In Sheffield, there is very little, if any, support at secondary school age in terms of special school provision for adolescents who have significant special needs. So there is one school that takes about 150 pupils, or the other adolescents with special needs are in mainstream provision with a certain degree of support. So the expectation in Sheffield is that at that point you go to a mainstream school. Have a think about other external factors. So if you are a young person with a learning difficulty or developmental disorder, you must know that you are a person with a learning difficulty or developmental disorder. You'll have many years of going to see doctors, other professionals, etc. You'll know that you are different. Your family will know that you are different. People will treat you as you are different too. So there's quite a lot of literature around the impact of that for the young person. So what is it like to be an adolescent when you know you have a problem? And that has been reinforced over the last 13 to 14 years. Okay. If you look at the social theorists around this, they argue that's the very definite. Have that experience right from being born up to your adolescence can be very detrimental. And people like A will talk about that as symbolically stigmatising individuals with learning disabilities. And it's not, there is some literature around young people, particularly diagnosis of autism spectrum disorders, who get 15, 16, who decide and request and try to pursue being undiagnosed, because they don't want to be defined by a label as they go into their adult lives. Okay, and there's quite a lot of literature to support that process. It's becoming more common across this country and the United States in particular. I've done quite a bit of talking, so let's hand over to yourself. Have a look at something called Turner syndrome. So that's a developmental disorder, a syndrome of learning disability, congenital, and the person will be born with it. Okay. So facts and figures about Turner syndrome only affect females, and it's to do with the sex chromosomes and how they're affected. So it's one of these chromosomal learning disorders. Affects about 1 in 2,500 live births. Talks about it being chromosomal and having incomplete chromosomes, particularly around the sex chromosomes. Results in quite significant developmental disorder right from birth, learning difficulties too. So defined by hearing problems, so part of being hearing isn't formed properly, so there's lots of hearing problems. They have a specific phenotype, so physical, developmental and behavioural. Okay. So they don't grow very tall, they have elements of dwarfism. Lots of learning difficulties, so cognitive development very impaired. And the big difference is that as they hit adolescence, they don't go through a stage of puberty. So they can go right through without going through puberty. So these are girls that will hit adolescence and how they physically look won't change quickly from being 12 to 20. Okay, so small, none of the physical changes, and will look very different to their typically developing years. Okay. Let's have a look. So this is a real example. So this is a young girl with Turner syndrome, she's 11 years old, goes to a movement for special educational needs. She's small in height, so she's about the height of a 6-year-old, and she's 11 years old. Has significant learning difficulties and hearing problems, so she wears a bar box which directly stimulates her cochlea to help her feel better. She won't start puberty until she starts some growth hormone treatment in a year or so, and starting puberty through that growth hormone treatment won't be guaranteed. So she may grow a little more, and with that she may start to go through some process of puberty, but that's not guaranteed at all. She's 11, so in this city she's about to make that transition up to secondary school. So we're just going to be thinking about what the challenges of going to secondary school are for her. So we talked about her internal factors, we're going to be thinking about the external factors, and thinking about that interplay between the two for her. So let's have 5 minutes, go back through your notes, have a think about what those issues are going to be for her, and we can do some feedback. So it's 1/2 an hour, so it takes 20 minutes to have that social cognition to do that. She will look very different to her peers, and her peers will find her very different. the implications of that? What do peer groups do if there's an individual or individuals that they perceive as being very different to them?
Especially outcasts.
Absolutely. The way they deal with it. So peers that don't identify with them, versus are not included. Okay, if peers are being particularly not very nice, how will that go further? Bullied, victimised, etc. So they're a really big concern and a big challenge. How easy is it in a large mainstream secondary school with 1,200 pupils to the staff to manage bullying? Easy or hard? Very, very hard. It's a big issue for them. And lots of young people are like this, where they get support in mainstream, they'll go back to the resource or the unit in the mainstream school at lunch and playtime, so they're not out with their peers and have to engage in any of that. Which then will spark a debate about how inclusive that really is. Okay, these are all debates with no yes or right answer, but that's generally what happens. So young people go back to the resource or the unit for their lunch and break times, and they know they'll be safe and an environment that they can okay, so peer groups, bullying, etc. will be a big challenge for her. What else? What's that her? She going to feel like in this school?
She might be quite aware that she looks physically different.
She'll know that she looks different, is different. Just the practicalities of being much smaller than your peers. Who's been into a secondary school recently? What, you know, just the sheer practicalities, what's that going to do? You've got people twice the height of you.
People might not notice her. They're all quite tall.
There's lots of moving around in between eating lessons, getting upstairs, through corridors. It's not easy, not as an adult who's new to the school, it's not easy, certainly not for somebody that's much smaller, just to manage the physical demands of not trying not to be knocked over, bumped, etc. A very practical consideration about her height, that she will see herself as very different to the others. And just thinking about the bits of psychology you've done, if you feel very different to your peers, how does that manifest itself? So if you were sat here doing this course with, and everybody else was 80 years old, what's that going to be like?
You feel a bit isolated.
Yeah? Okay, so you're not identifying, are you? You don't have an identity with that big group, so you feel different, you feel isolated, not quite sure who you are, who you should be, have very different experiences that you can't share with other people. It's quite isolating and lonely. What about being an adolescent that doesn't look like an adolescent?
So like the teachers and peers won't have the same expectations of her because of their perception of her. So she might not, sort of, in terms of learning and stuff, she might not be as motivated because she doesn't feel like they expect her to move on.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. It could be like that. It could be that they don't have very high expectations of her. It could be that, you know, if you're a group of 100 staff in the school, you don't actually know much about her, so you actually have quite high expectations of her. While she's at this school with all these other people, she should be doing what everybody else is doing. So it's difficult to know, really, but there'll be some issue around the expectations of her, where they come from and what those are, whether they're too high or not high enough, etc. That's a really good point about expectations. Okay, any other comments? If you think about adolescence being this very defining, you know, people talk about it being a very defining stage in young people's life, okay, that's where you work out who you are, what you want to do, etc. That's going to be very different for her. Doesn't have that cognitive capacity, doesn't have the same experiences, perhaps not the right level of expectations to come through that and come out with that real sense of identity, and this is what I want to do, confidence, self-esteem, etc. Okay, so just some points really, some feedback written on the slide, what we've talked about. So there will be a move of that age reviewing. Okay. And there's perceptions disorders and expectations of her age, maybe too high, maybe too low. Very vulnerable person, prone to bullying, okay. Will find friendships difficult, will have that lack of shared adolescent experience, that lack of cognitive ability to engage in those more complex activities that teenagers do, which creates their shared sense of identity. Quite likely to have a poor self-image, lack of confidence. It's not going to be an environment, these teenagers, where they go out every day and do something they're good at and excel in it and come home and go, great, that went really well. That's not going to be the case for them. It's going to be very challenging. And then managing those very physical demands of secondary school. Big schools, you change the lesson every break, you go from one end of the building to another end of the building, you've got a different teacher for each lesson. It's not quite a challenging context to demand to manage for anyone, and particularly more so for these young people. Any questions about that? Just a quick note about mental health in adolescents. Adolescence is often associated with the onset of mental health difficulties in everybody. So if an adult is going to be prone to periods of depression, psychosis, etc., features of that will often appear in adolescence. And again, it's been linked to these neurodevelopmental changes in the brain structure, etc. Susan Walker, for example, will talk about this prodromal stage. Adolescence is a prodromal stage of mental health difficulties. It just means it's a precursor stage. So through lots of studies of adults with mental health problems, they've traced it back and found that the features, the symptoms first started appearing in adolescence. So adolescence is quite a sensitive stage, a risky stage for mental health. People generally with those difficulties and developmental disorders are at much higher risk of mental health difficulties than the general population. So there is an argument that for adolescents with developmental disorders, this prodromal stage, this adolescent stage, is more risky than for the general population. And there's various reasons for that. So some people argue, the medics, the scientists, etc. will argue that there are genetic and or biological links between developmental disorders and mental health difficulties. The argument being that if you've got a developmental disorder, your neurodevelopmental functioning or structures are not the same as somebody without developmental disorder. If there's changes in neurodevelopmental structures and functioning, that can in some way put you at a much higher risk of mental health problems than for other people. That's quite a controversial argument. Digby-Tanton, for example, will argue that actually having a developmental disorder, your internal response to that, how you manage that, how you manage the expectations of you, causes a mental health difficulty. So anxiety could be a nice example of that. So if you're an adolescent who has autism spectrum disorders, you have quite a lot of insight about your difficulties, you may be prone to anxiety, which then potentially can lead on to depression, etc. External factors, we know that our group of young people with developmental disorders do have just much more chaotic lives and traumatic life experiences. So there's many more children and young people with developmental disorders that are fostered, taken away from biological parents, with quite horrific early experiences. So there is an argument that being exposed to those traumatic life events, not forming good attachment patterns, etc., again puts you at a higher risk of mental health problems. Other people, so more social disability type people in learning disability, will argue actually it's to do with their experiences, that nobody particularly looks after these young people's emotional welfare or understands it or supports it. And then other people argue, well, actually, it's just this kind of fact and figure exercise, that actually, if you have a developmental disorder, you come into contact with medical services more often, and purely through that, people are on higher alert to identify mental health difficulties in that person. There's an argument that actually it's an overdiagnosis or a misdiagnosis of comorbid type difficulties. They're quite complex. I would urge people to think about that, being exposed to more traumatic life events. So lots of people with developmental disorders haven't come from nice, secure homes, they've been fostered early on in life, exposed to some quite horrific events, haven't established good attachment patterns. We know that for young children, babies with developmental disorders, it's harder So I would argue that that's quite a significant factor for some of the young people. Okay, last few minutes. Let's have a quick think about case study that we've been thinking down. So the internal fact will be is that he has, or lots of diagnosis, kind of implies nobody really understands what's going on. But there is that's an internal factor, a complex developmental disorders, which may have implications for it in neurodevelopmental functioning and in other areas of development. So that complex growth of developmental disorders results in those changes that we talked about earlier, to physical development, neurodevelopmental development, and functional development, etc. Another internal factor is the development of mental health difficulties in adolescents. So it has these labels of obsessive compulsive disorder, for example, depression too. So it seems to be particularly at risk through that adolescent period, that post-parental period for mental health. External factors, okay, so his expectations, very much predetermined or set by previous educational placement. If a young person has been excluded from school several times, what is the expectation of that person? What is the young person's own expectations of themselves? If you have that very set clear history. Maybe sort of defeatist, like they're not going to succeed. What's the point? To get excluded again, been there before, it's fine, doesn't make any difference to me. Okay. Something very powerful about what's happened in the past, not only how that plays with his expectations on himself, but also how it plays with everybody else's expectations. So child A has come along, young person A has come along, been excluded from school twice. My expectations, perhaps yours are, well, this perhaps isn't going to go very well. It sets our expectations. Expectations of the individual, so he has loads of diagnostic labels. When you read that, what's your reaction to that? Lots of mental labels. What does that make people think about? Yes? Makes me go, well, I don't understand all those labels. I don't understand the labels, how am I going to understand him? What else? How else does it set your own expectations?
Things like mood disorder might make people think, oh, I don't want to go.
Absolutely. Gosh, look at all these labels. This is going to be hard work. This is going to be challenging. I'm just reacting to the labels. I haven't actually got a sense of who he is and what he's like. I'm just looking at these labels. What do you know about medical labels? Two people with a label of depression, exactly the same or different? So labels are always going to set your expectations, but actually people differ enormously even if they have the same label. Well, you've got somebody with lots of labels. What does that imply? We've briefly touched on it earlier.
Is it like the profile's changing maybe through?
Could be. It's constantly changing. I think it also tries. Nobody's really got to grips with this. Yeah. Okay. About this label, it's got another. People use labels as a way to try to explain patterns, etc. Doesn't always mean you've really got to the essence of what the person is and what they're doing. So right, the summary slide, and then I think 1 o'clock, we've got to